What up, Wizards? It's Dev and Igby, who is very happy if you can't tell. Now, we're here today because Dominaria United spoiler season starts up, oh hey chicken, in just one short, or more accurately, extremely long month. And she's gone again. Now, there's a lot that I expect to see from a return to Magic's sort of home base again, or at least that's how I see it, especially this close to Magic's 30-year anniversary. I wouldn't be surprised if Wizards really pull out all the stops here, and we got to see some rebooted versions of some of our favorite characters and locations, and how cool would that be, and I'm really excited for it. But as we know, sometimes the reboot isn't quite as good as the original. So what I really want from this set is some good reprints, whether they're fan service and they're not really that cool in standard, they're just cards that old timers like me like, or maybe some standard all-stars from yesteryear. One way or the other, there are a bunch of reprints I'd like to see in this set. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the top 10 reprints that I want to see in Dominaria United.
And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech.
Thanks, Rapping Dev. Now, as usual, because I do these videos all the time, I've imposed some restrictions on myself here. Now, for one, I can't pick a card that I've picked a million other times for this video, so I won't be talking about Fireball. I know you're very disappointed. I've probably picked Fireball 3 times in the past, so we're not going to be doing that here. So let's do it. As soon as you like the video, and make sure that you give me a sub. If you be my sub, I'll be your Dominaria-focused content creator for Magic the Gathering here on YouTube. Make sure you do all of those things, but let's go ahead and get to the honorable mention here. Now, there's a lot of reasons why a card might end up in this slot, but this time it's one of those cases of there's no way they're going to reprint this card because the mechanic's really weird, but I would like to see this card in a sort of rebooted form, like we were talking about earlier. But one way or the other, I don't think we'll probably ever see a Neither Shadow reprint into Standard. But I'd really like to. I expected this card's Oracle text to have changed to something like, if it's in the graveyard with at least 3 other creatures, then you can return it to the battlefield. But no, apparently the Oracle text still cares if the creatures are above it, which is weird, and I don't think we'll end up getting that in Standard. But with Skyclave Shade, which is effectively a take on this card, all versions of Nether Shadow are just a take on Nether Shadow, right? Your Blood Ghasts and stuff like that. Any black creature that can come back from your graveyard and straight into play, usually just a take on Nether Shadow. So I'd really like to get the original for once. Well, let's go ahead and start the list here with number 10. How you feel about Drain Life, Igby? How you feel about Drain Life? Now this one, I believe I've actually talked about on one list before, but I haven't talked about it on a million. So I wanted to make it number 10. Just a quick, a little bit more advocacy for Drain Life reprint in Standard. Don't give me Corrupt. Corrupt is fine, but it's not Drain Life. I'd much rather have Drain Life. Like I said, I'm not going to do Fireball, but this is basically the Fireball entry for the list. But I do miss Drain Life. We have March. The Black March, which is kind of does a sideways impression of a Drain Life type effect, but I just want Drain Life. As much mana as I can pump into this stinking thing, you take that much damage, and in case it doesn't kill you, I gain that much life. But in the meantime, I can point it at a creature or something like that. Just a nice little catch-all piece of removal that's not completely dead in control matchups. Seems like a cool thing to me that, again, I don't think would be too broken for Standard, but wouldn't stop me from having my fun with it, so I want it back. Now for number 9, everybody likes clone creatures, and I don't want to reprint the original clone, because that's just not a good enough clone nowadays. But I have a feeling that Verdurin Doppelganger might still be a really sweet clone effect to have in Standard without breaking too much. She costs 5 mana. It can be any creature, I guess. So the thing costs 5 mana to cast. That's a lot, especially in current day Standard, where 5 mana cards they tend to do a lot of things, right? Lolth can win a whole game for you. Goldspan Dragon can win a whole game for you. And so can Verdurin Doppelganger, but not by itself the way those other cards can. That said, the moment your opponent plays a Goldspan Dragon, you can have one too, which is pretty sweet, but I guess most clones can do that. It's the ability to switch it up every turn, so if your opponent plays a better creature than you have on your side of the table, then suddenly you get to have that creature too, and most clone effects don't do that. It's actually really sweet once you get to play with a Verdurin Doppelganger how much of a difference that 1 mana makes between the OG clone and a Verdurin Doppelganger, because again, when your opponent plays something really sweet, you get to basically play that creature for no mana as well. I just miss Verdurin Doppelganger. It's been a while since it's been in Standard, and I'm pretty sure Standard can handle it. Now for number 8, we are losing some important 2-drops in Standard, especially for the mono white deck. Like Luminarch Aspirant, can I never talk about this card again? It won't be long. It won't be long. This card image is in basically every folder for every video that I've made in the last 2 years. It's like I don't even know if I'm going to bring up the card, but I might as well go ahead and grab Luminarch Aspirant's card image because it's probably going to pop up in the video, and here we are. Talking about Lumi again. Get out of my format. But either way, we've got to replace some important 2-drops, and I think a good way to do that would be with both White Knight and Black Knight. Now, I hate to disappoint you, but you won't be getting any clever jokes of any kind about either of these cards' names because those jokes tend to not be clever at all, in fact. But what you will be getting is impassioned testimony about why I think it's perfectly fine to print both of these cards into Standard. Now, you might be saying, hey, Devin, which... Don't call me Devin. That is my whole first name, but most people who know me well enough just shorten it all the way to D. Hey, yo, what up, D? So you might be saying... Hey, yo, D, why these cards have protection from a color, so why they don't do that anymore, like you always tell me. In these videos, when I want to reprint a thing with protection from a color, someone in the comments section is like, they don't do that anymore. Yeah, they do. They do. Sun Gold Sentinel has protection from colors or can gain it, right? Shiziri Shelter gives something protection from a color. Catilda has protection from vampires, so like they still mess around with protection here and there, and I think if these two are just about the only cards with protection in the format, save a couple of other ones, then it's probably perfectly fine to have them in the format. And yeah, White Knight doesn't die to targeted black removal like, say, Infernal Grasp, but it does die to a Meat Hook Massacre, because it's not targeted, so it's not so bad. Black Knight doesn't die to Fateful Absence or a March of Otherworldly Light or something, but it does die to a Depopulate. So again, I think it's probably perfectly fine to have these cards in Standard, and it's mostly just going to amount to fan service and not much else, but I want my fan service. Speaking of black removal that can't kill a White Knight, I think number 7 is Terror. Can you imagine reprinting this into Standard? Now, we're still going to have Infernal Grasp come autumn, so I'm pretty sure we won't get another ridiculous piece of targeted removal like this, but we are losing Power Word Kill. I mean, I guess we already have 2 pieces of very good instant speed black removal in the format. We're losing one of those pieces, so I guess it wouldn't all the way surprise me if they printed another relatively restrictive piece of black 2-mana instant speed removal in a card like Terror. And again, not only give me and people like me a little bit of fan service, have Terror back in Standard, how cool would that be? But I actually think this would be playable on some level, although still not the absolute best piece of removal in the world. Although I imagine it's on par with Infernal Grasp, if not slightly better in a lot of matchups, but that doesn't make it too good of a card to print. Now for number 6, one thing that I think a lot of us are fairly happy about is that all of the runes stuff rotates out of Standard, right? No more runes themselves, no more Runeforge Champion. Now, the Enchantments deck is still going to have some important stuff. Generous Visitor, Kami of Transience, right? Like, there might still be a real dedicated Enchantress deck out there. It just won't take the same form that we've been seeing, but it's going to have your Jukai Naturalists and stuff like that. And a card that I'd really like to add to that deck that it doesn't have right now is Verdurin Enchantress. This is an old school favorite of mine, and yeah, a lot of these cards on this list might sound like they're just very much dev cards, but it's my list, and I hope that you can relate to these in some way. But even if you can, I hope you can see that Verdurin Enchantress would be a sick card to have in Enchantress decks in Standard. Every time you play an enchantment, you draw a card. That seems a little powerful, but of course this is 3 mana to get on the table, and you're not going to be able to play it until turn 3. It doesn't get any sort of cost reduction by Jukai Naturalist or anything. You can't play this on turn 3 and then fit another enchantment in or something, so you're not really drawing too many cards off of it until turn 4, and it's fragile in the meantime. So I think this card is actually somewhat balanced for the current Standard environment. But of course, if you do get to go on turn 4 and you drop 3 enchantments on that turn, you draw 3 cards, it's probably a bit much, but I still think that Verdurin Enchantress could be the thing that replaces, say, Showdown of the Scalds in these Naya Runes decks once that card rotates. So, Naya Runes is going to need to, or just green-white runes more likely, is going to need some sort of card advantage, and some kind of enchantment, or Enchantress in this case, that draws cards is certainly not unheard of. They printed plenty of them at 3 and even 2 mana over the years, but I would really like to have the old one back. This is the first card I ever built a Magic the Gathering deck entirely around, and I would love to have the old girl back. And speaking of enchantments, I got a couple of those to talk about coming up next. Number 4 is Pestilence. Now, there's still going to be a really important black sweeper in the format when rotation happens. And that's going to be the Meat Hook Massacre. I've already brought it up this video, and it's another one that I might as well download the card image of basically every time I make a video, because I'm probably going to bring it up, especially in these rotation videos. It's going to be a force after rotation. And I don't think there's going to be too many black sweepers that are better. And Pestilence, if printed, probably still wouldn't be better than the Meat Hook Massacre. But if you can tell, I have a preference for black cards that can deal damage directly to your opponent. I feel like that's a component of black that they explore every now and again, but has kind of been tossed by the wayside in recent years. And I would love an enchantment like Pestilence, especially if they reprint White Knight like I want them to. All right, or any creature that you can give protection from black to. And then just go off with Pestilence. Deal all the damage in the world to your opponent so long as you stay alive. Wipe the board of everything that doesn't have protection from black or indestructible. Just Pestilence is a sick card both in EDH and even Pauper to this day. And I think it could be a really cool card to be able to play in Standard, even though I don't think it would be broken in Standard. Reprinted with the freaky art, too. How freaky is that? I've made you look at it for a minute and a half. Let me take it away. I'm sorry. I apologize for doing that to you. Let's look at another black enchantment here for number 4. Can you tell that I really liked black cards back in the day? Bit of a black mage, the old D was, but number 4 is Bad Moon. Again, printed with this art. Printed with the old art. How cool is that? Big gray, cloudy night, and the moon with a skull on it. It looks so cool. It looks like something you draw on your desk in 6th grade, right? But still, it looks really cool to me. But I love a good Bad Moon deck. Don't you? Again, it took me a very long time to get 4 Bad Moon, but still back in the day, I had my 4 Bad Moon deck, right? We played Sui Black way back in the day, and oftentimes that deck included 4 of this card, and I'd really like to play it again, especially in a Standard environment that has, Graph Reaver and Biting Palm Ninja and Tenacious Underdog and all of these cool looking like mono black aggro cards that we have access to that might get a little bit better after rotation when all the good mono white stuff rotates. So I think that mono black aggro doesn't look like a half bad deck right now, but as soon as you give it an Anthem effect like this for just 2 mana, it gets much, much better. So I would love to see this card back, and this isn't all nostalgia. It's only about 70% nostalgia, but that 30% that I actually want to play it in Standard because I think it'd be a good card there, but again, not broken. That 30% is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Plus, you get to sing Creedence Clearwater Revival every time you play the song, and I think everyone can have fun with that. But let's get into the top 3 here. And these are cards that I think you could print in Standard, but again, in terms of words doing heavy lifting in sentences, think is really holding that sentence all the way up. Because some of these cards are very powerful, but there are cards in Standard that are very powerful. So in terms of some of these reprints, I think that Standard could handle it. But you've already placed your bets as to what these cards are. Let's get into it. Number 3 is Titania's Song. And you've lost the bet. I really don't think anybody bet on this card as being one of the cards. I almost picked Cormus Bell. That's not a good card. Don't reprint it. Anyway, instead we're doing Titania's Song, which I have a copy of. I also have a copy of Verdurin Enchantress back here somewhere, but I think it's on the floor. I think it fell off the shelf. And it's on the floor. And I'm too fat to go hunch over the couch and pick it up. But anyway, really obviously, very sweet card right here. But I don't think that this one is too broken for Standard, especially at 4 mana, which is why it's number 3 and not 2 or 1. You could probably reprint this card and it would be fine, but you do got to wonder what's going to happen once we get to the Brothers' War, and there's some really sweet artifacts in the format. Probably think we can bet some money they're going to base parts of that set on an artifact theme, so it's entirely possible Titania's Song is just ridiculously good. Now, I know we're not super used to seeing green cards work with artifacts very well. Usually green cards smash artifacts, but in this case, it's a green card that you would very likely splash into your deck. Your blue deck, your red deck, your blue-red deck, whatever. That just allows you to win the game on the spot. That's how Titania's Song usually works. That's how it worked my entire childhood, and I'd really like to do it again. Also like to see how good it is with vehicles. Seems like a decent interaction because you can swing with the vehicles if you can crew them, even if you don't have your Titania's Song yet. But when you get your Titania's Song, you can swing with your vehicles, and that seems kind of good, like kind of without having to crew them. They're usually smaller, I would imagine, but you don't have to crew them. I don't know. Titania's Song could be really good to have in standard, again, especially once we get an artifact focus set. But let's move on to numbers 2 and 1, which are definitely very powerful Magic cards. But you know what I'm sick of? You know what I'm just plumb tired of? Grinds my gears is discard not really having a very good win condition. You probably already see where I'm going with this. I really want a great discard payoff. And what better one than the original, possibly best one of all time, and that's the rack. This time I did have to go and get the card. I actually looked behind the sofa, which is probably very funny on camera. Just big butt with gray sweatpants looking over the sofa. But I couldn't find it back there, which is cause for alarm. So in the last 10 minutes, I've actually torn apart the room and I found it. I found my copy of the rack. It's original. It's an original rack, everybody. I also found the Titania's Song right there, but I can't find the Verdurin Enchantress, which is cause for alarm. But yeah, either way, I considered some other things for this list because I knew that I wanted to reprint an awesome artifact that would definitely have some kind of impact on standard. And it could have been Ivory Tower, which is an original Ivory Tower, somehow not in a sleeve. What are you doing, Dev? In dedicated discard decks, which I think you can still make in standard, even after rotation, this would just be the absolute best piece. Sometimes in these videos I've advocated for things like Megrim and stuff like that. Let's just go all the way. Let's just reprint the rack. If we're going one thing I'd really like Wizards to do is to examine what ridiculously highly very powerful cards they can afford to actually reprint into standard. And I think the rack might be riding that line really hard, but I also think it might be just barely acceptable, and it's a card that I would be really excited to see in my standard environment, at least initially. But we're at number 1 finally, ladies and gentlemen, which was originally Birds of Paradise, but it isn't anymore, although I still think there's cogent arguments for Birds of Paradise. Let's say they don't print some kind of suitable replacement for Pathways, or we don't get a good comes into play untapped like Dual Land or something like that. I think Bop could be an interesting way to explore like 5-color and even 3-color options. But anyway, probably won't be Bop. But if you're looking for an iconic 1-mana Magic card that I think could be reprintable in standard, and I have advocated for this before. I did a whole video, an entire video based on the theory that this card might get reprinted like 3 years ago. And it didn't happen yet, but that doesn't mean that they'll never reprint Lightning Bolt into standard. Especially considering Mono Red really isn't too much of a deck right now, and Lightning Bolt could make it a deck, but considering it's not much of a deck right now, I don't know how much more of a deck Lightning Bolt is going to make Mono Red. But of course, you don't have to worry about just Mono Red. You have to worry about decks like Izzet, which lose a ton of cards in the upcoming rotation. So keep that in mind. If they gain Lightning Bolt but lose half of their deck list, I'm not sure how much a lowly Lightning Bolt in that case is going to do to help them replace a card like Goldspan Dragon when it comes to actually closing games out. I mean, what other important burn spells are there actually to point at your opponent's face and finish games off if you're going to play burn in standard? I mean, after rotation, aside from possibly Lightning Bolt and definitely Play with Fire, there just aren't a whole lot of very good burn spells to build your burn deck around. So again, there's multiple scenarios, whether it's a mono red aggro deck or a mono red burn deck or some sort of Izzet control deck or something like that you might bring up. And in those cases, Lightning Bolt seems very strong, but I don't know that it's going to have the proper supporting cast of characters around it once rotation hits to be as impactful of a card as it should be. It should be one of the best cards in the entire format, and it very likely would be that if printed into standard. But again, I'm not sure that it would be. Yes, it would be a format all-star. Would it be a broken card in standard? I actually don't think so. And I know that there are conversations that have been happening at Wizards over the last couple of years to that same effect. Is Lightning Bolt too much for standard? And that makes me think that one day they're going to do it. And that day probably isn't too far from now. But that's it for this one. Hey, while I was back there looking for the rack and stuff, I did find some cool things. There's this Mario Kart thing that my cousin sent me when he was stationed in Japan. It's got cat hair and stuff on it, but I still really like it. And then there's this Sailor Jupiter that actually belongs to my wife Brittany, but for some reason it's in this room. But I found it was under the couch, so that's pretty cool. Sailor Jupiter is the best one I think objectively. I think we can all agree that Sailor Jupiter is the best. So just do all the YouTube stuff on your way out before you hit the lights. Make sure you check out the Patreon. Just $1 a month to vote on what content we do that's going to be especially pertinent once we actually hit rotation. Dominaria United comes out and all that. But in the meantime, still need to pay my rent. And new patrons would be very, very welcome. Sometimes you get outtakes from videos like this. If you do want to see me rooting around behind the couch in my sweatpants, maybe now would be a good time to join the Patreon at the $1 level so that you can see goofy bloopers and outtakes and stuff. But aside from that, check me out on Twitch where I play Magic and often get saltier than I think I should be getting. Pretty happy-go-lucky guy. Get salty when I'm playing Arena. I should really look into that. I don't know why. But anyway, that's all I've got for this one at this point. So just do YouTube stuff. Check out my other videos. We've got plenty of other stuff like the top 10, or the top 5 rather, predictions that I have for Dominaria, in which case I talk about at least one reprint that I'd like to see in that video. So it's like an 11th entry for this list if you watch that video. But at this point I'm babbling and you've clicked away. But if you haven't, thanks for sticking around. Appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you cats later. I am Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.